All right, everybody, welcome. I have a great treat for you today. I'm joined by the absolutely fabulous Amanda Litman, co-founder of Run for Something, author of books, veteran of campaigns, um, uh, indefatigable and optimistic, and enormously talented secret weapon for, no, actually not so secret weapon for what we have in store for us in the next few weeks, really, before the general election. Hi, Amanda. How are you?
Hi, what a generous introduction. I am very tired, so not fully accurate, but I'll take it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, the primary season has got to have been tiring. I just take 1 second at the top, just because I'm not sure everybody who's joining us knows about Run for Something, and tell them what it is.
So, Run for Something recruits and supports young, diverse leaders running for local office all across the country. We've been around since 2017, and in the nearly 10 years since we launched, we have built a pipeline of more than 275,000 young people who've said they want to run for office. We've endorsed more than 4,000 campaigns and helped elect just a hair under 1,700 millennials and Gen Z to local office, all across 49 states plus DC, mostly women, mostly people of color. And they're just amazing young leaders who are both leading now and I expect, and we're already seeing, will lead us into the future.
You've tapped something fabulous, generous, and optimistic in young Americans. If you're young, you could be excused for saying, I haven't lived in a democracy that's really worked for me. I'm not sure I'm all in on that idea. But you found ones who said, you know what, I am in on that idea. I think it can work for us, and I'm going to take a lot of personal risk to make that happen.
That's right. These are people who see what's happening around them. And instead of saying, screw it, I'm done, I'm not engaging, they're like, screw it, I'm getting in the fight myself, because if nobody's going to fight for me, then I have to fight for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's been really beautiful to see people step up in times where they really, like, you would expect otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I ran for office when I was 26, and I learned an enormous amount about the world, about myself and the world. But it was a wonderful experience, and it set me off on a life of public service and work. I think it's enormously important. I find something else. You sent out this newsletter that you send out, just an update of what Run for Something is. The newsletters I see usually, even the ones I write, they pick 3 things, make a point about it. Your newsletter, it doesn't so much make a point as describes an avalanche. You got like hundreds of bullet points from your candidates, all about what's going on all over America. And it looks like, let me put words in your mouth and then you tell me if it's right. The movement you're running is a full-on effort to change a politics that, in both parties, hasn't delivered for a democracy that hasn't worked for ordinary Americans, and make it more responsive.
I think that's right. And, the point of that newsletter, which is the Run for Something Feel Good update, which we've sent every Monday pretty much for the last almost 10 years. So hundreds of thousands of words, is to remind people that there's good things happening. That there's really reason for hope, even in the darkest days. Like, there are leaders who are running and winning and delivering and restoring trust in the process and changing what it means to be a public servant. Just this week, the update includes, a 26-year-old Ismail Luna who beat an incumbent Democrat in Wisconsin. The incumbent had a history of some legal issues and some crossing party lines, not in a bipartisan way, but in a screwing over the Democratic Party way. Ismail is a 26-year-old who worked at a local homeless shelter. He'd spent basically every hour outside of work knocking doors, making calls, talking to voters. It also includes a number of our alumni, so the people we've helped elect. People like Rick Galvin in San Antonio, who's been applying for a moratorium on data centers. Jennifer Chappell in Louisville, who's been doing the same. Kristen Gonzalez, a New York State senator, who led on the statewide moratorium against data centers. We have every week, and it's one of my favorite things, we get these news clips of our candidates across the country, thousands and thousands of them, and I get to pour through them and really start to understand the trends and what we're seeing. And it's amazing. All across the country, different candidates, different ideological homes, different sort of ways of approaching the problems, but they're all doing it. They're tackling the problems they see in a really meaningful way.
Yeah. Different ideological homes is an important issue right now as the press grapples with 2 things: trying to understand Democrats versus Republicans. I don't think that's hard, but trying to understand Democrats. because they look at Republicans who just are agents of Donald Trump. So it's easy to understand what he says is who they are. We're a different animal. We're not just the same thing, but taking our orders from somebody else. We aren't taking orders. So we're harder to understand. So when you talk about this diversity, how do we explain to people who we are?
For us, I think about it's candidates who are really tight on the values that they believe in, that they believe in equality and tolerance. They believe everyone should have access to affordable health care and childcare, that people should be able to live where they want, afford the homes that they want. They should have clean water to drink, safe roads to drive on. But that there's a lot of different ways we can solve those problems. And that's where the really interesting debates are. But if we're tight on values, if we're aligned on which way we're rowing, lots of different ways to pull the oar.
Those things that you named, and we can add data centers to that. I think what you found campaigning all over the country was that there is an enormous backlash to at least the way data centers have been shoved down our throats. If it were just an election on issues, Democrats would win 98% of the elections. I mean, rural America has been hammered by the Trump administration. If you're low income and white, you've been hammered by the Trump administration. But we're not going to win 98% of the votes, in part because of this values question. Trump has unleashed a kind of horror show of bigotry and racism and pointing the finger at other people to blame for things that appeals to the worst in Americans. And what I see in your candidates, that this is not an issues election, it's a values election.
I think that's right. And I think even more than that, it's a solutions election. People feel so frustrated by the problems they're experiencing, the high cost of housing and childcare, the high cost of gas and food, the ways in which the labor market feels totally screwed. And they're looking for candidates and electeds who can speak to those problems, who validate their fear and their rage, and who can present really concrete solutions that will actually fix it. I think this is why it's not really about ideology. It's about whether someone can, I like to joke, voters don't have ideologies. Voters have problems, they want solutions, and they mostly want to not think about this too much. And most of them don't, but they want to not be so stressed that their elected official isn't working on their behalf, is working on behalf of someone else. So it's one of the things I love about our candidates is because they are so clearly running, because there is a problem they care about solving. It is really tactile. You can feel it and see it in a way that makes it really break through.
Well, and local elections are, it's easier to do it and it's more essential to do it. I mean, I remember there was a time in my life I knew how many streetlights there were in a Chicago ward that I represented. And I could talk about how many got repaired, in a particular amount of time and how many potholes got filled. I mean, it's just the very basic stuff in local government affects your lives. Sewer floods, you can't really think about much else. So your candidates are getting to know what Americans care about every day in these races.
Yeah, they're really focused on the things that make quality of life good or bad. We talk about Congress and the Senate, and yes, it's absolutely important to win the House and win the Senate. It's important to take back control of the federal government. Don't get me wrong, super critical. But on a lot of the issues that people really care about, especially things like housing or transportation, that's not, solutions for that are not coming from DC. No. And especially in the next 2 to 3 years, until we have a Democrat in the White House, we're not getting any governing out of this Congress or the next one. Hopefully they will have accountability and oversight. Hopefully they will do aggressive hearings. Hopefully they will not confirm Trump's appointees or his Supreme Court justice picks or his other judges. But they're not going to pass legislation like universal child care. They're not going to pass.
He's got a veto.
Yeah. And they're not going to be able to agree with it enough anyway. Yeah. So I think it's really important, especially over the next 2 years, to make sure that on the state and local level, we're electing leaders who can really deliver, because part of the problem the Democratic Party has right now is a credibility gap. Yep. People do not trust that we can keep our words. They do not trust that we will make promises that we can actually follow through on. The way we can prove that is by proving it.
Yeah, and I think, that distrust is more at the federal level, because I think locally Democrats, there are a lot of them who have done it. You're also, though, playing a long game, which you really haven't mentioned here. But these people who win local elections are going to be around to win federal elections in the future. They're going to help us build a durable majority some point so that we don't keep every election switching back and forth and the world can't trust us because we can't make up our minds whether we're devils or angels.
That's right. For us, we think about it in terms of building sustainable power. It's not just about winning the short term, about winning mayors and school boards because they'll do good things, though it's certainly part of it. It's also because if you control these state and local offices, as Republicans have proven over the last 50 years, you can control the levers of power. You can shape the maps that are being drawn. You can shape access to the polls. You can also build a bench of talent of people who can run for and win higher office. The more city council members you have in any particular area, the more options you have who can run for Congress 5 years from now. It all builds on itself. And I think it's really important to see both the short-term and long-term fights here. That's why Run for Something has what we call our Battle Up Plan, which is a 12-state strategy to sort of shape what the battlegrounds might be or could be in 2032. And that includes states as varied as, of course, Texas and Florida and Georgia, but also, Idaho, Mississippi, Louisiana,
North Carolina,
Nebraska, North Carolina. It's a whole range of states because we know that if we're going to try and make sure that in the future, some of these races states will be competitive, if we do not build state and local infrastructure now, they will be off the grid in 2032.
Yes, and off the grid, just so people understand the way population is moving, they'll have more congressional representation in the future than they do today, so than the current purple states do today. So if we rely on the swing states that are swing states today, we will never have a majority, not ever.
That's right. The redistricting experts and the folks looking at the maps as they're expected to be in 2032 say that, it'll be a map that even if Democrats hold the blue wall, which no proof of that anymore, it will be nearly impossible for Democrats to win an electoral majority. We cannot act as if that is an inevitability.
Well, this goes back to my avalanche point. The old politics are gone. And the old guard sometimes, I'm old, but the old guard sometimes just doesn't know that we're not living in that era anymore. We have to look at the fights that are coming. We have to look at the talent that's available and the technology of campaigning is different. You want to take a second and talk about, I go on my phone and I say, who should I vote for? AI is going to give me an answer. You want to talk about that problem?
Yeah, this is something we actually started hearing from candidates back in 2025. It's one of the perks of working year-round, on years and off years. We are in touch with candidates very early in the process. We tend to hear things before they become big stories. So in 2025, we started hearing from some of our folks, hey, I'm knocking doors and voters are asking me about things they're seeing on ChatGPT about me. How do I know what those are? How can I get ahead of that? I thought that's a very good question. So we decided to dig into this. And what we realized is that there's a whole world of how LLMs are answering questions about candidates and who to vote for that we have very little insight to. So our tech team, led by Jordan Haynes, built what we call Campsite. Campsite is a tool that replicates queries in browser, knowing that your experience with ChatGPT is going to be very different than my experience with ChatGPT or with Google, which also now basically provides AI answers for everything, and replicates that experience and runs those queries hundreds of times a day over the course of years. What we are trying to do is better understand where are they getting their information from, and then how can candidates influence it. So Campsite both tracks changes in those answers and then makes recommendations on how to move them closer to what the ideal answer is for that campaign or that issue. We launched Campsite beginning of June, making it available to as many candidates and campaigns as we can. We have dozens of current users. We're onboarding dozens more. We have a wait list of a couple hundreds. And we tried to make this as accessible as we can. So Campsite is available for local candidates for as cheap as $9 a month, because we know that most tools for campaigns, they're built for presidentials, which means a school board race has no access to it.
Yep. Well, so like I said, the technology, the candidates and the issues are different than the old guard thinks. What did you learn was anything in the primaries a surprise to you?
I wouldn't necessarily say a surprise so much as it really reinforced some of the things we've been seeing over the last couple of years, but on a bigger scale. Money cannot buy an election anymore. It's important to be able to run a sufficient campaign. You need enough money. You do not need more money than your opponent necessarily. And at a certain point, there's a real, not just lack of return, but backlash. People don't like feeling like their votes are being bought. So we've had run for something candidates over the years pretty regularly win campaigns, even when they are outspent, often by double digits,
Wow. Yeah.
10-1 margins. Seeing that happen on the national scale pretty regularly over the last year has been really affirming that what we're seeing locally has spread up. The other thing we are seeing is candidates really pushing on a generational argument, noting it's not that they're a bad person, they're just not the right fit for this moment anymore, that they are not well suited to lead us forward, and that the people who got us into this mess just can't be the ones to get us out of it. So I think that perspective, which we've seen on the local level for the last 5 or 6 years, has really started to filter up.
So the national media is obsessed with Michigan, right? They were about to be obsessed with Wisconsin because they are terrified of young people who are calling themselves democratic socialists. I get that the DSA put out a platform that's utter nonsense, like complete drivel. But these candidates, they're not campaigning on that written platform. I think they're using that we're socialist Democrats as those of us in Chicago used were independent Democrats to say we weren't part of an old machine. I think it's a generational differentiator more than a policy one. And I wonder what your thoughts are.
I think that's a big part of it. It's also the fact that for most young people, the problems they're experiencing are so acute in terms of the affordability crisis. Like stuff is just so expensive that if you're not a politician offering big, aggressive solutions, like you're not speaking to that moment for them. So, God bless the sort of moderate and centrist candidates who are trying to promise realistic incrementalist change. I mean, I get it. You don't want to promise more than you can deliver, but that's not the way to win an election right now. Promising more than you can deliver and then walking people through the process of how you're going to try to deliver and what it means and why it is so hard. All of this, that's how you've got to approach it right now if you want to win young people.
Yeah.
Young people aren't necessarily, anti-capitalist, although certainly some are. What they are is pro someone trying to solve their problems. And the DSA and the sort of broader, farther to the left movement or ideological space are the only ones putting forward solutions that feel commensurate to the size of the problem.
I don't feel that those candidates are massively different than FDR. I don't see that hugely different. I just see they're focused on the great mass of America and its experience as opposed to a handful of elite experiences. And so I think it's squarely in a democratic tradition, almost all of it that I see. And I worry that, actually, let me put it this way. I think candidates are learning not to pay attention to professional campaign advisors and pollsters who tell them all the time, here's where America is, and you have to stay within the bounds of what your constituent thinks to get you elected. While the Republicans have abandoned that and have moved how Americans think. I think this new crop is determined to move Americans' thinking in a different direction rather than just to cater to existing prejudices.
I'm always really wary about being totally dismissive of professional political operatives. One, because I am one, but two, because I think that there's sometimes so much frustration put on the consultant class or the operative class as if candidates have no agency. Candidates can decide who to listen to. Ultimately, consultant consults, and the candidate can decide whether to take the advice or not. And I think what we are seeing is candidates who have such a strong sense of values and strong moral compass that consultants, the good ones, know, you don't tell the candidate what they believe. You help shape, the tactics about how they're going to communicate it, where they're going to communicate it, in what format they might communicate it, but you're not shaping what they believe. And the candidates who let the consultants drive what they believe are candidates who don't have the strong, spine of steel to begin with.
Yeah, well, they need that. But let me just push that one step further with you, because it's something I'm curious about. Have you seen this cycle where, not so much locally, but where the professional campaigners are closely aligned with the big funders, and there's a link there that ends up rewarding the campaign funders and rewarding the campaign professionals, and the candidates and the people are they don't end up in the better end of that deal?
It's an interesting question. I think there's certainly some outside actors who are aggressively funded by corporate, money, billionaires who have maybe different aims. There's a whole range of ways in which money influences politics here. That's why I really think it's important to be transparent about where your money comes from, how you raise it. In particular, if you're doing like money to campaigns or you're paying for consultants to work on campaigns, you should really know where that money comes from. I also think it's telling a lot of these bigger sort of think tanks right now don't release their donors.
No.
Worth always flagging that one. I understand that there are security concerns right now where, Trump will sic the Justice Department or the IRS on big Democratic donors, but he's going to do it anyway. So you might as well, gain some trust here. I think that there is certainly more of that than you'd think, but also some of it is a little bit chicken and the egg. Are the donors going to that actor because they want them to do something or because they believe they're already doing something that they want to see?
Okay, that's fair. Absolutely fair. All right, let's transition. The things that you said we had to do in order to win young people and win elections in the primaries, how does that translate to the general election that's coming?
I think we're going to see a lot of them win these general elections. We're going to see folks winning, in particular in deep red or, purple areas. We have a number of Democratic candidates or independent candidates running in places that Democrats have never contested before or haven't contested in decades. And what we're seeing this cycle in particular is that the Democratic voters and anti-Trump voters will literally crawl over broken glass to cast their ballot, while Republican voters or more conservative voters, So there's a real enthusiasm gap here. Now, that doesn't mean we automatically win them. That means they're up for grabs. And I think the candidates who are able to really talk to voters and make a compelling case about why they're going to solve the problems people are experiencing, they're going to be able to win.
So the kinds of things that drove victory in Democratic primaries, you don't see as being impediments in a general, but rather in some ways assets, because it goes to authenticity, goes to legitimacy. And I think that's something people are hungry for.
Well, I also think it goes to the ability to excite people and to get them fired up. Most of the time when you're winning a primary, you've got a strong volunteer base behind you. You've built a pretty good team. Not always. Great campaigns lose, bad campaigns win all the time in any kind of context. But generally speaking, especially in these primaries, hustle counts for a lot. And candidates who are willing to do the work and can really connect with where primary voters are, that matters. Now, there's so much research here that says, just because you can win the primary does not mean you can win the general. I would posit the counterfactual, also true. If you cannot win the primary, you will not have the enthusiasm to win the general. You won't. You won't have the base with you. You won't have the people excited for you. You won't have the manpower or the money for you. So the fact that you can win the primary is the leading indicator, but it's not necessarily predictive.
Okay. I want to talk to you about Black Americans. A lot of the progressive movement has not been embraced by Black voters. And Black voters have a unique set of challenges, problems that candidates could address, should address. And Democrats cannot win if Black voters don't feel this party is working for them. How are the candidates that you've seen around the country making inroads really and providing answers finally to some of the challenges facing Black America?
Well, I think it's worth noting that there's a real generational divide within Black Americans in the same way there is with any other group. Older Black Americans are a little more moderate or relatively conservative than their younger counterparts. Younger people writ large are either a little bit more unaffiliated or more progressive. So I'm always careful to put it's not totally a monolith here. And
yes, Black community is diverse like every community.
Like every community. And in particular, I think the generational divide is important because we talk about, you need to be able to win over Black voters in any given state. And it's the older Black voters definitely are a little bit more moderate. Younger Black voters have a very different relationship to power and to the Democratic Party, and you've got to be really mindful of how they think about this. That being said, they talk to them like people, and they're talking to them about cost of living. They're talking to them about housing. They're talking to them about childcare. every community, regardless of race or even class, really, really cares about how much things suck right now if you want to be able to buy a home or have a family or live where you want to live. It is so expensive. And it's even
hear
more
it from my own children every day.
It is even more expensive for communities of color. So we really make sure that our candidates are focusing on the problems that they can solve, that their voters can see themselves in the solutions. Like, you don't talk about restoring democracy. You should restore democracy or protect democracy if you win. Talk about roads, talk about housing, talk about schools, talk about the things that people can feel in their day-to-day life.
Okay. In the general, you're running in deep red areas.
Mm-hmm.
I am so grateful to you for that, for so many reasons. One of them is that people in America have been lied to for a long time, and there hasn't been anybody standing up and saying, you know, what you're hearing John Hannity say, those are lies.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just been nobody there no human being there to say there's another way to look at all of this. And that just that is going to be great for the whole country, great for the social fabric of our nation, let alone political power. And where candidates don't win in those districts, they still will change the overall margins.
That's right.
And that makes a huge difference when you multiply that by, I don't know, what are there, 10,000 elected offices in America?
That's right. There are 500,000 elected offices in the United States. No, it's
500,000. Sorry. Wow.
Yeah, about 70% of the local races go uncontested any given year. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of places where there's simply only one candidate on the ballot, which means sometimes they'll cancel elections. Sometimes the candidate isn't knocking doors or talking to voters. They're not pushing on the issues. So we believe that, you know, as much as we like to win, winning is important, and there's no moral victories in politics. Good things can happen as a byproduct of a campaign beyond the outcome on election day. You know, a candidate running can galvanize folks, can update data, can close the margins for future cycles. You don't go from 70-30 to 50-50 overnight. You go 70-30, 65-45, or 65-35, 55-45, and closer and closer and closer until all of a sudden, you know, just like in music, it's 10 years later, they're an overnight success.
Yes.
Overnight, it becomes a battleground after 10 years of conservative investment.
Hard work.
So we really think about this as the long game. And, you know, even if our candidates lose, if they're able to make it a little bit closer or push the needle a little bit more, that's a win.
And people are having, I've noticed this, fun campaigning. You know, I mean, for a while, Democrats were dour and the Republicans actually had more fun than we did. I always thought that was really outrageous. But I think that's shifted. I think we are having fun out there. And I've seen on a bunch of campaigns something I haven't seen on the Democratic side in many years. People are like finding other people and getting married, you know, based on who they run into working on campaigns. That kind of enthusiasm, that kind of fun is enormously important to success.
I think that's right. I think candidates who are making it a joyful party to be a part of, because politics is social. You want it to be somewhere where people want to join you. They want to be part of the fun. You want to have a little FOMO. Nobody wants to go to a party where you're going to get scolded or yelled at for showing up too late. You want to go to a party where people are going to celebrate you, bring you in, give you a piece of cake, and show you how to get there a little earlier to the next one.
Yeah, and I've seen that in around your candidates all over the country.
That's right. You know, I love seeing how they campaign because they really do bring a lot of joy to the work.
And when I mentioned before, I have I said children, but they're adults. My kids are like these candidates, and they are feeling these same issues. It's hard to afford the life they want to afford and the work that they're doing. But my son and I campaign together. You know, we go out and knock doors together, and he just finds it a great experience with all the other, not with me, but with all the other young people who are out there doing this campaigning.
It's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I know. So everyone listening, run for something. Find Amanda's candidates. You know, they're in your neighborhood. They're out there. They're now in the general election. Supporting them is going to help you win Congress. Really, it is. It's going to change margins in every election, and it's going to help build sustainability so that we can take any wins we get this cycle and drive them into a permanent majority.
That's right. Our folks are helping generate turnout for up and down the ticket. So you knock doors for a school board candidate in your area, you're also helping the congressional, Senate, gubernatorial, or other kinds of candidates on the ballot. It all matters.
And Amanda, if people just decide they want to support Run for Something, how do they do it?
Go to runforsomething.net. You can donate. You can look up our candidates. You can learn more about how to run for office, and you can keep an eye on what we're up to.
Thanks for your time today.
Anytime.